In 1912, the state of Imperial China as everyone knew it came to an end with the overthrow of the last Qing monarch. The next 4 years saw a would-be emperor Yuan Shikai take over for a short reign, but his death would quickly solidify the new era in Chinese history that was to come. Now, there wasn't really one clear leadership figure in China. Huge chunks of the nation were being controlled by warlords, which made it impossible to form any kind of real, unified government. But the Chinese Nationalist Party, or Kuomintang, was determined to create a centralized government and strip power from the warlords. Despite their varying ideologies, desperate to make a change, the Kuomintang, or KMT for short, reached out to the CCP, which at the time had only started as a communist study group, and the two formed the first united front in 1924. Together, the KMT and CCP launched the Northern Expedition against the warlords and Beiyang government, which had, after the death of Yuan Shikai, hoped to exist as the central government of China. The campaign was launched in 1926 and lasted until 1928, though there was a break in the middle when the KMT became divided into a left and right faction and the First United Front fell apart. Despite the shared goal of establishing a unified government, the nationalists and communists quickly went from allies to enemies, and for good reason. On April 12, 1927, the right-wing faction of the KMT and its National Revolutionary Army began a purge of all communists and left-wing groups in Shanghai, which led to the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands. This ripped the First United Front not only in half, but 3 ways, as the KMT split and the CCP broke away from both sides of the nationalist movement. And by this point, the right-wing faction of the KMT had taken over most of eastern China as they established their base in Nanking. While the international community saw this as China's new legitimate government, the CCP was not by any means ready to accept them. Uprisings and guerrilla warfare brought on by the CCP were nevertheless only one of the Nanking government's worries over the next decade. After claiming to have unified all of China once they'd taken Beijing and Wuhan from the left-wing KMT and the CCP, Chiang's government was faced with a much bigger problem: an invasion from Japan. On September 18, 1931, dynamite exploded near Japan's South Manchuria Railway, and though there wasn't really any damage done, the Chinese were immediately blamed, and as if to scale, Japan responded by launching a full-scale invasion into Chinese Manchuria. In reality, it was members of the Japanese Kwantung Army that had placed the dynamite for a false flag operation, believing that the invasion of Manchuria would be in Japan's best interest. For China, this launched another period of dangerous instability. By September 22nd, Japan was already in de facto control of South Manchuria, though they still claims to want positive diplomatic relations with China. Nevertheless, by 1933, Japan had installed a new puppet government in Manchuria, with the formerly ousted Chinese leader Pu Yi at the helm. Part of the reason that Japan was able to pull this off was due to the fact that China itself was still at war, as the KMT had been busy repeatedly attempting to crush the CCP opposition. This hadn't been successful, as the communist leader Mao Zedong had instead established the Soviet Chinese Republic just before the Japanese invasion. This kept the KMT, who was supposed to be leading and protecting all of China, distracted as they obsessed over crushing the CCP. As a result, many citizens became outraged by the acts of the already unpopular nationalists and pointed the finger at them for Japan's aggression and victory. As approval for the KMT dwindled, the opposite was beginning to happen for the CCP. But the nationalists were still working to encircle the communist territories in their campaign to overpower the opposition. By the fall of 1934, the KMT troops had finally managed what appeared to be a successful encirclement, this time around the Jiangxi Soviet region. Cutting off supplies to the communists and building blockhouses to fortify the encirclement, the nationalists were finally making headway, but only for a short time. The CCP forces would eventually break through a gap in the encirclement, as the KMT army and allied warlord armies were either preoccupied or too hesitant to pursue the enemy. This led to what became known as the Long March. It began on October 16, 1934, and lasted for an entire year. Roughly 100,000 communists, made up of soldiers and civilians, marched for around 6,000 miles through the mountains to escape the attacking nationalists. When the journey ended in October 1935, only 10,000 of the original 100,000 arrived in Yan'an. And yet, the CCP, their Red Army, and their civilian supporters could not be intimidated nor suppressed. On the contrary, Mao Zedong declared their deadly march to be a manifesto and worked to establish a new Soviet territory. Now, the public support for the CCP had skyrocketed. It almost seemed as though they were finally in a position to take the upper hand over the nationalists. But in 1937, another wrench was thrown in this plan. The Japanese had found easy success when they entered Manchuria, and with minimal punishment from the international community, they were starting to move toward pushing their luck. This time, though, the Chinese were ready to set their differences aside and put in a group effort to stop any further aggression from Japan. Nevertheless, this cooperation was a bit coerced, as the KMT's leader, Chiang, was still focused on wiping out his communist adversaries instead of aligning with them to first defeat the Japanese invaders. Angered by this, as many within the nationalist side wanted to prioritize the external threat first, two of Chiang's generals, Yang Hucheng and Chang Shui-liang, kidnapped their leader and forced him into an alliance with the CCP once more, embarking on the creation of the Second United Front in 1936. The following year, Japan launched a new, full-scale invasion campaign which would prove to be beyond brutal. As fighting with Japan dragged on into the Second World War, so did the Second United Front, although not without hiccups. The actual level of cooperation between the KMT and CCP appears to have been minimal, and clashes over dominance between the two hadn't stopped entirely. And although World War II would end with Japan's full withdrawal from China, the latter would only have a short time of peace before civil war reared its ugly head yet again. By 1946, the KMT and CCP were back at it again after Chiang launched a new campaign against the communists. This time, though, the CCP had roughly 3 million troops to rely on and held 1/4 of China's lands. Furthermore, the CCP wasn't just popular among their own, as the Soviet Union was backing them now more than ever. The Soviets, who had been in Manchuria following the Japanese invasion and surrender, worked closely with the CCP, requesting for them to follow the Soviet troops' slow withdrawal from the region, therefore keeping it out of nationalist control. As a result, war raged on, but the odds were ever tipping in the CCP's favor. KMT troops were defecting, CCP policies were bringing more and more of the peasant class into their cause, and the Soviets were keeping a close eye on their communist comrades. And even with US support, the KMT was crumbling at a startling rate, having lost a staggering number of 3.2 million casualties in the war with Japan and shattering their own public perception due to the unpopular policies of Qing. The nationalists were simply beyond help. There was nothing left that could be done to aid them to success. The CCP was on the brink of victory. By October of 1949, the KMT territories had fallen to the communists, and on the 1st of the month, Mao Zedong declared the foundation of the People's Republic of China. Only 2 months later, Chiang and roughly 2 million of his men fled from mainland China for the island of Taiwan, where they established their own government, the Republic of China, which many believed would soon fall to the CCP just the same. Subsequently, the US's President Harry Truman initially declared that the United States would not assist the breakaway nationalist government and would instead refrain from any involvement in the case of the People's Republic of China invading the Republic of China. This would eventually change in response to shifting regional policies, and because so far, Chiang and his new rival government were still standing, and that fact remains true today. Decades later, the Chinese Civil War hasn't really ended. The Republic of China still exists in Taiwan, which sees itself as its own independent nation, while the CCP hasn't lost its hold on the mainland People's Republic of China, which also claims Taiwan as its own. Although there is no active war between the two sides, there isn't much to say that it can't break out at any time. The Chinese Civil War still has no end date.